Hello. I'm rattling your cage this morning. This is a very esoteric Kabbalistic rattle, and it's getting pretty beat up, but it's a very complex rattle, actually, and it's going to get a bit more of a workout tomorrow night at the Kabbalah presentation. So I've got it out. Anyway, hello, and welcome to another installment of The Key to Solomon's Key, Secrets of Magic and Masonry, or is this Masonry's lost symbol? And now today's chapter is on the Knights Templar, and the next couple chapters are on Knights Templar. And if you're interested in more depth about what I call the Knights Templar and the most dangerous secret in the world, a couple of months ago I did a 2-hour online presentation with PowerPoint and all of that, just on that subject. And the recording of that is now available. And if you're interested in getting the replay of that, just message me, Facebook message me, and I'll send you the details on how to do that. Because it's a very interesting subject. Anyway, today's chapter is chapter 6, the Knights Templar. And it has, and it's got the seal of the Templars there, which is 1 horse and 2 men. And the epigram is from Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum. And the quote is, "The Templars have something to do with everything." There's a story that's often repeated by secret society and conspiracy buffs that in 1792, during the French Revolution, nearly 500 years after the martyrdom of Jacques de Molay, at the moment the guillotine severed the head of King Louis XVI, an unnamed man leapt upon the scaffolding and plunged his hands in the king's blood and shouted in French, "Jacques de Molay, thou art avenged." Another unsubstantiated legend holds that upon hearing the news of the king's execution, the same words were reportedly uttered by Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the notorious and for a brief time Masonically connected Bavarian Illuminati. Whether accurate or not, it's certainly true that these stories are widely circulated and were widely circulated almost immediately after Louis's death. And the phrase continues to this day to be the watchword for revolutionary acts that resist and strike back at superstition, tyranny, and oppression, and the oppression of human thought and freedom, especially those perceived to be perpetuated by the Roman Catholic Church and the divinely chosen monarchs of Europe. For the better part of 2 centuries, Masonic scholars have passionately debated what, if anything, the Knights Templar have to do with Freemasonry. There's certainly no hard evidence or documents we can refer to that informs us in so many words that on such and such a date, the Knights Templar went underground and set up a secret benevolent society that employs building tools as esoteric symbols and Bible stories as moral lessons. However, many influential Masons of the past, especially those in 18th century France enthusiastically embraced the Templars as their own predecessors. Still, supporters of a historic Templar-Mason connection can only point to the most generic elements within the rituals and liturgies of the craft that demonstrate, at most, a harmony of anti-clerical goals and attitudes shared by the two organizations. However, in the philosophical arena, where traditional history is more important than history, this, in and of itself, can have profound significance. As Coyle's Masonic Encyclopedia affirms, even the most conservative Masonic commentators admit the connection has become inextricably linked. Quote, "This theory of Templar origin, which, mythical as it is and wholly unsubstantiated by the authority of history, has exercised a vast influence in the fabrication of advanced degrees and the invention of the continental rites." Unquote. As an adult, I became interested in the Templars, not because of their possible connection with Freemasonry, but because I was acutely interested in the accusations leveled against them. The charges were many, but the ones that most caught my attention were those that alleged that new initiates were required to spit upon and trample a crucifix underfoot, that they were forbidden to worship the crucifix, that new knights were told that Jesus was a man that died like all men die, that in the higher degrees Templars worshipped a bearded human head or an ass-headed statue called Baphomet, and something that interested me very much, that they practiced magic. What a curious assortment of accusations to be leveled at a group of Christian knights. Yet there was a certain consistency in many of the confessions voiced by the tortured members of the order that might lead us to conclude that there was perhaps an iota of truth in these accusations. But before we open that can of worms, let's take a very brief look at what we know about this colorful band of brothers. On Christmas Day, in the year 1118, that's AD, of course, CE, a group of 9 French knights, including Hugh de Payens, cousin of Comte de Champagne and husband of Catherine St. Clair of Roslin, stood before the Patriarch of Jerusalem and King Baldwin II of Palestine, and vowed themselves to poverty, chastity, and obedience. They said they wished to form a holy order of warriors, and requested they be given as their headquarters the area adjacent to the eastern sector of the king's palace in Jerusalem, a place we know today as the Temple Mount. For reasons that no historian can properly explain, the Patriarch immediately accepted their vows, and the king summarily surrendered the area to the knights. This area of Mount Moriah had a rich legendary past that reached deep into Semitic mythology. It was said that an exposed boulder at the summit of the mount first issued at the dawn of time from the mouth of a mythical serpent Tahum. And it would serve as a portal connecting the upper world and the infernal regions. It is also where tradition informs us Abraham built an altar of stones upon which he prepared his son Isaac for sacrifice. From that altar, Jacob, son of Isaac, took a stone to be his pillow as he slept and dreamed of a ladder reaching up to heaven. Upon awakening from this vision, Jacob anointed the stone with oil, and it supposedly sank into the ground to form the foundations of what would be the three great Jewish temples. Now, I'm not going to do this very often, but if you're interested in this story, I'd like you to at least write down just a couple of notes here. And this is the first one, because I'm going to talk about the so-called three temples. The first temple was King Solomon's temple, 959 BC. The next temple was a larger but less ornate second temple, and this is 535 BC. It was built by the children of Israel upon their return from captivity in Babylon. And the third temple was the magnificent third temple, 20 BC, built by Herod the Great and destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. That's all. You don't have to take any more notes. But hang on to your note. Herod's temple was the largest of them all. It was the temple that stood during Jesus' lifetime, where the second chapter of the book of John tells us he was taken as a child and where he scourged the money changers. The knights called themselves the poor Knights of the Temple, Pauvres Chevaliers du Temple, or Knights Templar. And it appears they traveled to Jerusalem for the singular purpose of establishing the order and securing the Temple Mount as their headquarters. Their express raison d'etre was to protect the increasing number of Christian pilgrims who traveled the dangerous roads to the newly conquered Holy Land. It was a job that was already being handled by the Knights of St. John. It is highly likely, however, that that was truly their intention. At least not at first. In fact, it's doubtful the 9 Pauvres Chevaliers du Temples did any soldiering at all for the first 9 years, during which time it appears they kept to themselves and remained at the site of the Temple Mount. Modern Templar buffs speculate this tiny group of knights were engaged in an aggressive excavation of the ruins of the Temple Mount, searching for the Ark of the Covenant or King Solomon's gold or other priceless relics. Much as many of us would like to have a solid archaeological evidence to support these speculations, there appears to be none. Nevertheless, it's hard to imagine that 9 men billeted for 9 years in the closed confines of the most legendary and mystical spot on Earth wouldn't eventually want to have a look around. What, if anything in particular, they might have been looking for, we can only guess. but conspiracy enthusiasts and modern novelists certainly think they found or learned something very important, something that in a few short years drew to them the goodwill and deference of the Church of Rome and the princes of Europe. The story of the Templars' meteoric rise to power is unique in the history of Western civilization. And it's a subject of many well-researched and well-documented books and essays. Still, it's frequently hard to separate fact from fiction and legend. Curiously, for our purposes, legend is as important and relevant as fact, for religious and political movements are shaped by what people believe to be true rather than what may actually be factual. I implore the reader to keep this fact firmly in mind as we delve deeper into this subject. For 9 years after their formation, the Pauvres Chevaliers du Temple initiated no new members and remained doing something at the temple site. Then, in 1126, two of them, Hugh de Payens and André de Montbard, returned to France to confer with Montbard's nephew, the Abbot of Clairvaux. The abbot was no ordinary churchman. He was the senior advisor to Pope Honorius II and the most brilliant and charismatic figure in 12th century Christendom. We know him today as Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. Now, whatever it was he learned from his uncle André, Bernard immediately threw his undiluted energies and influence behind the Templars. He convinced the Pope to give the Pauvres Chevaliers du Temple full church recognition and volunteered to create the order's constitution. Oddly enough, the rule of order that Bernard composed contained no reference whatsoever to protecting pilgrims. What it did do was unite the two most powerful forces in the Western world, the Church of Rome and the ruthless brutality of the feudal warrior. The Knights Templar were to become the first truly disciplined army since the Roman legionaries. Fighting men who lived like monks, Christian soldiers whose bloody occupation did not jeopardize their prospects of going to heaven because they had a license to kill evil. Unlike other knights who owed allegiance to a specific king, duke, baron, or nobleman, the Templars were to be holy warriors, answerable only to the Pope. They were not, however, the Pope's army. Indeed, from the very beginning of their existence, and for the next 200 years, popes treated the Knights Templar as if they were too hot to handle. They were allowed freedoms and privileges enjoyed by no other body in Christendom. They had their own priests, their own confessors. They were allowed to build their own uniquely styled churches. They were freed from countless other papal restrictions and supervisions. Europe's noble families soon began to lavish gifts of money and property upon the new order, and their privileged sons raced each other to join the poor Knights of the Temple. In 1128, before returning to Jerusalem, Hugh de Payens a relative by marriage to the St. Clairs of Roslin Chapel fame, traveled to Scotland and paid a visit to his in-laws. The St. Clairs were obviously impressed with what they learned from DuQuette and immediately granted the new order a tract of land at Ballintroduc. Excuse my Scottish friends. Ballintroduc. Well, now it's just simply called the town of Temple. And the St. Clairs gave it to the Knights to be their headquarters in Scotland. Almost overnight, a new class of citizen was introduced into the feudal system of the world. A new kind of man, a free man, unencumbered by the restrictions of church and state. A free man who needed no pass from bishop or king or baron or lord or magistrate to move as he will on the face of the earth. From town to town, province to province, country to country. This freedom of movement is one of the privileges of a modern Mason as well, as it's echoed in the Masonic ritual. When asked what induced you to become a Mason, the proper answer begins with the words, "that I might travel in foreign countries." After the Crusades, the Templars' international structure and organizational skills turned them into a super-economic entity, a world army, a country without borders. Because they could skirt church laws that forbade the borrowing and lending of money with interest, they set to work to become the world's first international multinational mega bank. They invented checking. They maintained an army of fierce and highly trained soldiers and a fleet of sailing ships. Kings borrowed money from them. And even though they were technically answerable to papal authority, for 200 years, popes let them do whatever they wanted. It was as if the Templars, as the movie gangsters would say, had something on the church. They had something on the monarchs of Europe. Some even speculate they had something on the Saracens. Were the Templars blackmailing the world, or were they simply a dynamic idea whose time had come? If they did have something, what could it possibly have been? What could they have unearthed at that legendary spot where heaven and hell are said to touch the earth? What secret could Hugh de Payens and André de Montbard shared with the future Saint Bernard and the St. Clair family that would have been so earth-shaking as to reward the Templars with a blank check from the masters of their worlds? Was this object, this piece of information, this treasure destroyed with them? Was the secret lost? These questions have been the subject of speculation for 700 years. In the last few years, several best-selling books, naturally, have theorized that the treasure might be lost gospels or something relating to Jesus and the early history of the church. Perhaps documents or artifacts proving that Jesus had a twin brother or that he was married and had children. Some believe the Templars found the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant, or the mummified head of John the Baptist, or the demonstrably unresurrected body of Jesus Christ himself. Others, more recently, have speculated they found the the golden tablets of Moroni that would eventually find their way to the New World, to be discovered by Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet. A popular motion picture suggests it was a good old-fashioned treasure of ancient artifacts, gold and silver. Whatever the nature of the secret, speculation that it was not lost with the seemingly complete destruction of the Templars is fuel to a white heat when we learned that as the tide turned on Wednesday, October 11th, 1307, just 2 days prior to the universal arrest of the Templars, a fleet of Templar ships quietly slipped from the harbor at La Rochelle and were never seen again. French Masonic historians make no secret of their destination: Scotland. The mystery of what, if anything, the Templars found has driven men mad for nearly 1,000 years. I'm not exaggerating. For some individuals, the Templar myth has become an all-consuming and unhealthy obsession. And their wild and paranoid public conjectures continue to bring unfair scorn and ridicule upon the efforts of legitimate scholars and researchers. Speaking through one of his characters in the novel Foucault's Pendulum, one of my favorite books, Umberto Eco makes the following all too true observation. Quote, "For him, everything proves everything else. The lunatic is all idée fixe, and whatever he comes across confirms his lunacy. You can tell him by the liberties he takes with common sense, by his flashes of inspiration, and by the fact that sooner or later he brings up the Templars." Unquote. I realize that by writing this book, I too am running the risk of putting myself in the above category. But run the risk I must. Because whether or not their secret treasure was real or legendary, whether or not their connection to Freemasonry is historic or merely traditional, where magic, masonry, and King Solomon and Solomon's key are concerned, the Templars do indeed have something to do with everything. I know that was a little long for a chapter today, but I wanted to read the entire chapter. Tomorrow we'll take the Templar secret. In the meantime, I'll remind you again that the full PowerPoint lecture is now available, and just scroll down on my page or message me and I'll share with you the information on how you can view that. Okay. Have a good Tuesday. Be careful. Be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. Bye-bye.